After my wife cheated, I teamed up with her affair partner's wife for ultimate revenge. A betrayal like no other, one that shattered my trust and left me reeling. I had been married to Sarah for over a decade. We had a good life, or so I thought. That was until one night when everything changed. It wasn't just an affair, it was the ultimate betrayal. The man she had been seeing behind my back was someone I had trusted. A colleague, a friend. And the worst part? His wife was just as devastated as I was when she discovered the truth. I could have wallowed in anger, confronted Sarah, or sought a quiet revenge. But that wasn't enough. No, I had a better idea. What if we joined forces, her affair partner's wife and I? Together, we could make them both feel the consequences of their actions in a way they would never forget. I never imagined I would find myself in such a dark place, but this was personal. The game had changed and I was ready to play. It all started like any other marriage. Sarah and I had been together for almost 12 years. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and got married shortly after graduation. Our life seemed perfect on the surface. We bought a house, traveled occasionally, and shared a quiet, comfortable existence. I thought we had everything figured out, until everything came crashing down. I first started noticing small changes in Sarah. She had become distant, often glued to her phone, and her mood seemed to shift without any apparent reason. At first, I chalked it up to work stress or personal issues. We all go through phases, right? But the gut feeling that something was wrong began to gnaw at me. I started paying closer attention, but what I found shocked me beyond belief. One night, I came home earlier than usual from a business trip. The house was quiet, and Sarah wasn't where she was supposed to be. I didn't think much of it until I checked the messages on her phone. That's when the truth hit me like a ton of bricks. There were messages from another man, flirtatious, intimate messages that left no doubt in my mind that something was going on behind my back. The man she was seeing wasn't some random stranger. No, it was someone I knew well, someone I had worked alongside, someone who had been to our home and shared meals with us. His name was Mark, and I never once suspected that he would betray me in such a vile way. I was crushed, confused, and angry all at once. But rather than confronting Sarah right away, I decided to investigate further. If she had been hiding this affair from me for so long, I wanted to know every detail. What was the extent of their relationship? How long had it been going on? What had she been telling him behind my back? But as I dug deeper, I discovered something even more unexpected. The worst part wasn't the affair itself, it was Mark's wife, Angela. She had no idea about the betrayal either. I found out that she had been living a lie just as I had. It was a cruel twist of fate, and I knew I wasn't alone in this pain. Angela and I could do more than just sit back and suffer. We could make them both pay. The revelation that Sarah was cheating with Mark tore my world apart. But the shock of realizing that I wasn't the only one deceived by their betrayal was overwhelming. Angela, Mark's wife, was a woman I had always respected. We'd shared casual conversations at social gatherings, and I never suspected for a second that her life was as shattered as mine. When I discovered the truth about the affair, I realized she had been living under the same roof as a man who was unfaithful, just as I had been. The idea of two marriages crumbling simultaneously, one of which I had helped to nurture for over a decade, seemed surreal. Sarah and I had been together for so long. We'd built a life together, not just as a couple, but as a team. We had friends, shared dreams, and even had discussions about growing old together. To learn that all of that had been a lie felt like a betrayal of everything I had ever believed in. I was no longer just the hurt husband, I was a man who had been lied to on a deep, intimate level. And now, it seemed like the only person who could understand my pain was Angela. I didn't know what to expect when I reached out to her. Would she be angry? Would she feel the same rage I did? What I didn't expect was for her to feel an overwhelming sense of relief. She had suspected something was off for months, but the idea of confronting her husband or asking questions never crossed her mind. Like me, she had been in the dark, hoping that things would get better, hoping that the person she loved was still the man she thought he was. It was hard to blame her for the way she felt. She had been deceived just as deeply as I had. Angela and I began meeting regularly, talking about the affair, sharing our pain, and figuring out how to move forward. It was therapeutic at first, but as our bond grew stronger, we both realized that this betrayal wasn't something we could just forgive. Mark and Sarah hadn't only broken our hearts, they had broken our trust, our families, and our lives. And somehow, in the midst of all this devastation, we found common ground in a shared desire for revenge. We didn't need to confront them right away. No, this was going to be something more calculated, something much deeper than just confronting them and walking away. We would make sure that they paid for every lie, every broken promise, and every secret they thought they could keep hidden. Our revenge would be served cold, and it would be a lesson neither of them would ever forget. The first few weeks after learning about Sarah's affair were filled with numbness. Every moment seemed to be a blur of disbelief and anger. It wasn't until Angela reached out to me that I began to truly process what had happened. She had found out about the affair just a few days before I did, but she had kept quiet too. She had been struggling with the same feelings: shame, rage, and heartache. But unlike me, she had kept her composure, choosing to bide her time before taking action. I remember the first time we met in person. I was hesitant at first. What was there to say to someone who was going through the same thing you were? But when Angela sat across from me in the coffee shop, her eyes were filled with the same sorrow and confusion I had been battling since Sarah's betrayal. It was almost as if she could see right through me, as if we shared the same unspoken understanding. The first words she spoke were simple: "I didn't know what to do with her." That sentence hit me like a ton of bricks. In that moment, I realized that Angela wasn't just a stranger to me. She wasn't just Mark's wife. She was someone who had also given everything to a marriage built on lies. She was someone who had trusted her husband, as I had trusted Sarah. The more we spoke, the more I realized how much our situations mirrored each other. Angela told me about the subtle changes she had noticed in Mark, how he'd become distant, how he'd started working longer hours, how his excuses seemed more frequent. She had never suspected infidelity, but she had known something wasn't right. She had begun to question her own instincts, doubting herself and her ability to see through the mask Mark had worn for so long. I, on the other hand, had been blinded by my own complacency. I had trusted Sarah completely. There had been no signs of her betrayal, no hint that she had been hiding anything. But when I started piecing everything together, I realized I had been ignoring the subtle signs. She had grown distant too. She had stopped spending time with me the way she used to. Her excuses were getting more elaborate, and her tone had shifted. I had been so wrapped up in my own life and work that I failed to notice the cracks in our relationship. It wasn't until Angela opened up to me that I began connecting the dots. She had found out about the affair the same way I had, through a simple, unguarded text message. Mark had accidentally left his phone unlocked one evening, and when Angela checked it, she saw messages between him and Sarah. She saw photos. She saw plans for late-night rendezvous. And, like me, she had been crushed. I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of empathy for Angela. She hadn't deserved this any more than I had. But more than that, I could see that she had been holding on to something even deeper than I was. She had been holding on to a dream of what her life should have been. The betrayal had shattered that illusion. As we continued meeting and talking, we grew more connected, more united in our desire for justice. We realized that we had a unique opportunity here. Not only could we confront our spouses together, but we could make sure they never got away with what they had done. We didn't want revenge for the sake of revenge. We wanted to take back what was ours. Our dignity, our trust, our sense of self-worth. We began formulating a plan, discussing how we could make them realize the consequences of their actions. It wouldn't be enough to just confront them. No, this needed to be something that would make them understand the gravity of their betrayal. We needed them to feel what we had felt: the heartache, the betrayal, the sense of being used. We weren't just going to get angry and throw accusations. This would be calculated. It would be strategic. And most of all, it would be devastating. One day, Angela came up with an idea, something that made my blood run cold with both excitement and fear. She suggested we track Mark and Sarah's movements. We could gather evidence, create a story they couldn't deny, and then hit them where it hurt. We wouldn't just confront them with the truth, we would expose them for everything they had done. And we would make sure their lives were never the same again. I hesitated at first. Was this really something I wanted to do? Did I want to go down this dark path of manipulation and revenge? But then I remembered how they had made me feel. How Sarah had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. How Mark had done the same to Angela. And I realized that they had already taken everything from us. What was left for us to lose? We started by gathering as much information as we could about Sarah and Mark's affair. Angela used her insider knowledge of Mark's work schedule to pinpoint when he would be meeting Sarah. We set up discreet ways to monitor their movements. It wasn't easy. Every moment felt like a risk. But we were determined to make them pay. Each step of the way, I could feel my emotions shifting. What had started as a sense of raw hurt and confusion had evolved into something much darker. I was no longer just the betrayed husband. I was someone who had been wronged and who was now fighting to take back control over my life. I wanted Sarah to understand what it felt like to be powerless, to be stripped of everything she had taken for granted. Angela, too, seemed to be transforming before my eyes. She had always been a calm, composed woman, but now she had an edge to her. There was something fierce about her now, something determined. We weren't just in this for ourselves anymore. We were in this for each other. The plan was simple, but its execution was far from easy. Angela and I had spent weeks tracking Sarah and Mark, gathering evidence, and preparing ourselves for the inevitable confrontation. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment when it all came crashing down. We had spent countless hours monitoring their movements. It was like we were living in the shadows, each of us carefully observing the other's every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. Angela had been more methodical than I had, using her own intimate knowledge of Mark's habits and schedule to predict his every move. She even managed to get a hold of his phone one evening while he was in the shower. The information she gathered was a goldmine: text messages, photos, even receipts that proved they had been seeing each other regularly behind our backs. But nothing could have prepared me for the day I found out the full extent of their betrayal. It was a Thursday afternoon when I received an anonymous tip about a meeting between Sarah and Mark. The tip was vague, but it was enough to set off a chain of events that would alter my life forever. Angela and I met at our usual spot, a secluded cafe that we had been using as our headquarters for weeks. The air was thick with tension as we exchanged information. Angela had a look of determination in her eyes, but I could see the weariness behind it. We had both been living in a state of constant stress, unable to trust anyone, not even ourselves. But there was no turning back now. That afternoon, we learned that Sarah and Mark had arranged to meet at a hotel just outside of town. The timing was perfect. They had no idea we were watching. We followed them discreetly, making sure to stay out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest as we neared the hotel. This was it. The moment when everything would finally come to light. As we watched from a distance, I could feel my emotions starting to overwhelm me. The anger, the betrayal, it was all coming to a head. I had no idea how I would react once I saw them together, but I was ready. Ready to finally confront Sarah, ready to confront Mark, and ready to make them both pay for what they had done. When Sarah and Mark finally emerged from the hotel, my stomach twisted into knots. They were laughing, seemingly carefree, oblivious to the storm that was brewing just a few steps away. I could see Sarah's face clearly, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction, and I wondered how long it had been since she had felt that way with me. I wondered if she even remembered the vows we had taken together. Angela and I exchanged a silent look, our hearts racing in unison. This was the moment we had been waiting for. We had the evidence. We had everything we needed to expose them. But something inside me told me that this wasn't going to be as simple as confronting them and walking away. This wasn't just about getting closure. This was about making them understand the depth of their betrayal. We followed them back to their cars, maintaining a safe distance. My mind raced as I thought about what would come next. How would I confront Sarah? How would I make her see the hurt she had caused? How would Mark react when he realized what had happened? I had no answers, only the cold, hard certainty that I was about to change everything. We continued to follow them as they made their way to a nearby restaurant. It was a popular spot, one that I had frequented with Sarah in the past. But now, everything felt different. The air seemed thicker, the world around me distorted as I saw them through the lens of betrayal. My anger bubbled up, but I kept it in check. This wasn't the time for emotions. This was the time for action. As they entered the restaurant, Angela and I hung back, waiting for the right moment to confront them. It was hard to explain, but I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about regaining control over my life. It was about showing Sarah and Mark that they couldn't just tear everything down without facing the consequences. I glanced at Angela, who had remained silent throughout the entire ordeal. Her expression was unreadable, but I could sense the storm raging inside her as well. She too had been wronged. She too had been betrayed by the person she had trusted most. This wasn't just my fight anymore, it was hers too. Minutes later, they exited the restaurant, laughing as if nothing had happened. They were completely unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Angela and I exchanged a look, and without a word, we moved into position. It was time to make them face the truth. Then, just as we reached them, I stepped forward and cleared my throat. Sarah and Mark froze. Their eyes widened in shock as they realized who was standing in front of them. For a moment, there was silence, a heavy, pregnant pause that seemed to stretch on for eternity. Then I spoke. You think you can betray me, and I wouldn't find out? I asked, my voice steady but cold. Sarah's face paled as she realized what had happened. Mark's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might try to say something, but I wasn't interested in hearing excuses. I wasn't interested in their lies anymore. I wanted them to know that they couldn't get away with it. Angela stepped forward, her voice low and dangerous. You both think you can get away with this? You've both lied and cheated, and now it's time to pay the price. For a brief moment, Mark and Sarah just stood there, stunned by the confrontation. But it wasn't over yet. I still had one last thing to say. You both betrayed us, I continued, but it's not going to end like this. We've got everything we need to expose you. Your lies, your deceit, it all ends here. Their faces fell, and I could see the realization hit them like a truck. The facade they had been living behind was crumbling, and there was no way to hide it anymore. The confrontation was the beginning of a long, painful road to justice. Sarah and Mark, stunned by the revelation, stood frozen in place for a long moment, processing the weight of what had just transpired. I could see the panic in their eyes, the fear that they would finally have to face the truth of their actions. Angela and I stood firm, unwavering as the reality of the situation settled in. Mark was the first to speak, his voice weak and defensive. This is crazy, he muttered, almost to himself. You don't know what you're talking about. This isn't what you think. His words held no weight, his denials felt hollow, transparent. He knew, deep down, that we had all the evidence we needed to destroy him. I didn't want to hear any of his lies. I wasn't interested in hearing him try to explain away years of betrayal. His excuses meant nothing to me now. What mattered was the truth, and what mattered was the pain they had caused. I turned my gaze to Sarah, whose eyes were wide with shock. I could tell she was struggling to find the words. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. In the silence that followed, the truth hung between us like a heavy fog. Don't bother, I said, cutting her off before she could speak. There's nothing you can say that will change anything. You've made your choices, and now you will face the consequences. For a brief moment, the air between us was thick with tension. I watched as Sarah's face drained of color, her hands trembling slightly. Mark shifted uncomfortably, and I could see the regret in his eyes, but it was too little, too late. They had crossed a line, and nothing could undo the damage they had done. Angela, standing beside me, spoke next, her voice full of raw emotion. You both think you can tear apart lives without any repercussions? Well, you're wrong. It's time you both face the truth. The words stung, but there was no denying the reality of the situation. Sarah and Mark had destroyed everything we had built. Our trust, our families, our sense of security. They had betrayed us both in ways that words couldn't even begin to describe. I could feel the weight of everything bearing down on me. The years of marriage, the years of loyalty, all shattered in an instant. The pain was almost unbearable, but I wasn't going to let it consume me. This was the moment where I took back control. As the silence stretched on, I knew we couldn't stay here forever. We had to act quickly, decisively. Angela and I had already made plans, there was no turning back now. We both knew that the only way to truly heal was to ensure they understood the consequences of their actions. We would make sure they paid the price for what they had done. You'll both be exposed, I said coldly, my eyes locking with Sarah's. Every detail of what you've done will be laid out for everyone to see. Your lies, your betrayal, it won't stay hidden. Sarah's face contorted with anger, but there was no fight left in her. Mark's expression was a mixture of guilt and fear. They both knew they had crossed a line they couldn't return from. They had no way of stopping what was coming. But the revenge didn't stop with just the exposure. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Mark's betrayal go unpunished. I had one final card to play, a card that would ensure they both understood the gravity of their actions. The legal battle would be long, but I was prepared for it. Divorce proceedings would begin immediately, and I would fight tooth and nail to ensure I got everything I was entitled to. The affair had already cost me my peace of mind, but I wasn't going to let it cost me my future as well. I would take back everything they had tried to destroy. The house, the assets, the shared life we had built over the years. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Angela and I had spent hours together in the days following the confrontation, working tirelessly to gather more evidence and prepare for the legal battle that lay ahead. Every email, every text, every phone call between Sarah and Mark was cataloged, documented, and prepared for use in the divorce proceedings. The divorce lawyer we hired was experienced and relentless. We knew the road ahead would be difficult, but we also knew we had the upper hand. Meanwhile, Sarah and Mark scrambled to salvage whatever shred of dignity they had left. They tried to deny everything, hoping their apologies and feeble attempts at justification would sway anyone. But no one believed them. Not the people who had known us for years, not the people who had witnessed the love Sarah and I once shared. They had no defense. The truth had been laid bare, and it was impossible to erase. The legal process took time, but the outcome was inevitable. Sarah's affair was exposed to the public, and the fallout was swift and unforgiving. People who had once been close to her turned their backs on her, and the life she had built for herself crumbled. She had no one to blame but herself. As for Mark, his own marriage was falling apart as well. His wife filed for divorce, unable to cope with the humiliation and betrayal he had caused. The consequences of his actions had rippled through both our lives, and he was left to pick up the pieces of the shattered life he had built. In the end, I walked away with everything I had fought for: financial stability, custody of our children, and a future free from the shadow of betrayal. I took back what was mine, and I found peace in knowing that I had taken control of my life once again. Sarah and Mark would never have the life they had once dreamed of. Their affair had ruined everything. They had betrayed us, but in the end, it was they who paid the price. And as for me, I moved on. I rebuilt my life, focusing on what truly mattered: my children, my happiness, and my future. I learned that sometimes, revenge isn't about striking back in anger. Sometimes, it's about taking back control, letting go of the past, and making sure the people who wronged you can never hurt you again. If you found this story intriguing, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you never miss a new story.